Okay guys, let's briefly recap about the tissues of leaves. So in general you have an epidermis, and epi is the outer, dermis is dealing with your layers of cells, and so the epidermis is just a single outer layer of cells. We have an epidermis, and so do plants. So within the plants we see two different types of epidermis. We have an upper and a lower. The upper epidermis is where we have a very thick layer of wax on the outside of the plant, and that is considered the cuticle. So you'll see a little bit of a shine on the plant. And there's a lower epidermis, which if you flip the plant over, that's the lower epidermis. And it still has a waxy cuticle, but it's a little bit thinner than the top. And there are guard cells within the stomata in between all of the epidermis. With the mesophyll, meso is dealing with the middle, and those are going to be tissues that are filling the most of the leaf inside the epidermis. And so we're looking at the palisade. The palisade mesophyll are going to be tightly packed cells in the upper half of the plant. Those are located more toward the top of the leaf, and we have many chloroplasts here. And within the spongy mesophyll, those are going to be loosely packed cells within the lower half of the leaf. There will be some air spaces, and we will see few chloroplasts there. Lastly, we have the vascular tissue, and vascular is found within the veins of the leaf. And we have the xylem and the phloem. So starting with the xylem, we are looking at vessels. They are long, they're considered dead, and they're tubular, so they're a tube structure, and we see water and dissolved mineral ions go throughout this structure. In the phloem, we're dealing with food, so we are seeing it lined with living cells. You will have some water because you need some water in order to move that food just through diffusion, and we will see pores between the cells. And what we're going to end up seeing later on in our unit is that the xylem and the phloem work very closely together. That water can transfer over into the phloem to help with the movement of the food, like sucrose and glucose. Now let's look at the relationship between how these tissues and these cells are structured within our leaf, and the functions and the importance of where they are. So remember that the cuticle is that shiny waxy portion on the top and the bottom of the epidermis, and it's meant to prevent water loss. It makes sense that it's on the outside, right? If it's on the outside of the plant, well, it can prevent the water from leaving that plant, just because that waxy portion has some lipid structures to it. It has some lipid biochemicals, and lipids are very hydrophobic. They don't like water, therefore the water is not going to be attracted to the cuticle, therefore the water will not leave the plant. Within the upper epidermis, it makes sense that it's a very thick cuticle to prevent water loss, because the sun hits the upper epidermis first before it hits that lower epidermis. It probably doesn't hit the lower epidermis very often, and so since it's closest to the sun, it makes sense for it to be a thicker cuticle. Looking at the Palisade Mesophyll, it contains chloroplast, and when you look on our picture, you can see here this structure, right, is the Palisade Mesophyll, and that's closer to the upper epidermis, and it makes sense because it contains lots and lots of chloroplast. You can see kind of in this area, okay, those really tiny dots, those are the chloroplast. And so obviously if the sun is going to be hitting this upper portion, it makes sense for there to be more chloroplast located there. And then within the spongy mesophyll, it's loosely packed, and so we're looking right here, okay? And this, it doesn't need as much chlorophyll, so we're not going to see many of the cells have, chloroplast contained there. And it should be closer to the stomata, because within the stomata, which are going to be located right here, okay, the responsibility is for gas exchange, right? So carbon dioxide and oxygen gas exchange is happening within those stomata, so it makes sense for those spongy mesophyll to be contained there. Now when you look at the vascular bundles, they're located right in the middle, and we want them right in the middle because they're going to be located right by every single cell. It is the closest place for majority of cells to reach to get water and to obtain food. Now if you look at the lower epidermis, where the guard cells are located, we want the lower epidermis to contain the stomata, or the guard cells, because we don't want evaporation of that water to happen quickly. If these guard cells were placed on top right here instead, so you've got the guard cells and then this opening right here is the stomata, right? We would have a lot of water loss. So we want to prevent all that water loss from happening. We want to make sure we are not having more water loss because of the sun, because of external factors. So having it in the shade makes more sense. All right, guys, that's it for this assessment statement.